Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks to Amy for inviting us to the Temple of Nature here in the Wood River Valley of Idaho. I'm going to speak to you for just 5 minutes. I'm going to give you a brief tease about an important emerging solution to the problem of delivering climate finance to developing countries. I'm going to build on some of the things you heard contextually from Josh Lincoln earlier today and what Hank was just talking about now. But I'm going to start with a quick recap of a little bit of bad news and an introduction to some good news. The bad news is that we are in really deep yogurt. The path we're on right now will take us to a future that will be 3.5 to 4.5 degrees centigrade higher than the pre-industrial level. We'll face that future at a time when my children's grandchildren have greeted 2 billion more members of our human family, most of whom will arrive in sub-Saharan Africa and South and East Asia, where the infrastructure needed to deliver basic human needs is not in place. The good news is we can meet the climate challenge, the existential threat of disruptive climate change, at the speed and scale at which the risk is growing, if and only if we are able to mobilize the financial ecosystem to provide capital for building and sustaining the infrastructure that's necessary to support just, equitable societies, not just here in the US, but across the world. Because what you heard yesterday is really true. This is a problem that requires all hands in all lands and all working together. If we do that, if we mobilize our collective resources, particularly the global savings pool that's managed by pension funds, insurance companies, large asset managers, sovereign wealth funds, we can meet this challenge. We can close the investment gap on sustainable infrastructure. So what's the gap? The gap between what we are currently investing in climate-smart infrastructure worldwide, something under $500 billion, is the difference between that and what is estimated it will take to meet the Paris targets and indeed to achieve the SDGs, which unfortunately is about 2.5 to 4.5 trillion US dollars equivalent per year. So we're only off by a factor of 5 to 10, but we're falling further behind. The mission of the Initiative on Closing the Investment Gap in Sustainable Infrastructure is to develop financing strategies and business models that will deliver low-cost, patient capital to developing countries and emerging markets to underwrite the infrastructure that they need to fulfill the commitments they've made to us collectively under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It is also to do that by providing attractive, secure, robust investment opportunities to institutional investors. How are we going to do that? We propose to do that by following what you heard earlier, developing deeper partnerships between subnational entities in developing countries, aggregated together and securitized, and then financed by the issuance of pure play green bonds to institutional investors. The first implementation of that is the Solar Airports Financing Facility for SIDS. We're working with a dozen small island developing states with the airport operating authorities in those states to introduce solar power mini grids and battery storage at the airport to replace their current conventional generating technologies that rely on diesel fuel and heavy fuel oil. Indeed, by doing this, the benefit for the airport is not just the reduction in local air pollutants that affect the environmental justice environment of communities around the airport, but a dramatic reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and a major reduction in the operating costs for electricity at the airport. For all the airports that we've looked at, this model reduces the annual operating cost for electricity by 50% or more. And as a result, it becomes self-financing over the life of the asset at the individual airport level, and by aggregating and securitizing them into a portfolio, is able to be replenished without going back to any sort of concessionary or philanthropic or donor capital. Why the SIDS? We're interested in the SIDS because they've contributed about this much to the global risk of disruptive climate change, but are at the sharp edge of the wedge on climate impacts. We know that they have the kinds of targets that Hank was talking about for 100% renewable energy in the electricity sector, but they don't have the capital to build in those money-saving assets on their own territory. We want to help them get access to that capital at reasonable and bearable costs, and at the same time, to solve a systemic challenge facing the managers of particularly the fixed income portfolio in institutional investors' application of their clients' needs. This particular allocation in the institutional investors' portfolio is suffering today because of the sustained low interest rate environment that we have all experienced since the 2008-2009 financial crisis. In the current environment where interest rates are rising, the inventory of very secure investment-grade financial assets that these very smart managers have purchased over the last 8 years is now underperforming, both what they could replace it with and what their target returns are. So we're suggesting that they liquidate some of those assets and reinvest them in sustainable infrastructure in developing countries. The good news is this model works, and it's replicable and scalable as long as we all work together. Thank you.